Most people don't think. They just rearrange their prejudices. Every day, we are bombarded with thousands of decisions, headlines, and opinions. But have you ever stopped to wonder, are your thoughts actually yours, or are they just a reflection of the noise around you? The difference between those who struggle and those who lead isn't just talent or IQ. It's the ability to think critically in a world that wants you to follow the crowd. Welcome to AudioBook Global. Today, we are diving into a life-changing journey. Critical thinking mastery. Transform your mindset for ultimate personal growth. Most people believe they're thinking when in reality, they are reacting. A thought appears and they accept it without question. An emotion rises and they follow it without resistance. A belief feels familiar and they assume it must be true. This happens so quietly and so constantly that it feels natural. But natural does not mean useful. Natural does not mean accurate. Natural often means unconscious. Critical thinking begins the moment you realize that your mind is not a neutral place. It is shaped by habit, repetition, fear, comfort, and influence. From childhood onward, ideas were placed into your mind before you ever learned how to examine them. You learned what was normal, what was acceptable, what was risky, and what was impossible, not through careful reasoning, but through exposure. Over time, these borrowed thoughts became invisible rules guiding your decisions. Turning critical thinking into a daily habit is not about becoming cold or skeptical or argumentative. It is about becoming awake. It is about learning how to pause before believing, how to slow down before reacting, and how to choose clarity over comfort. It is the quiet discipline of asking yourself whether the thoughts you are following are actually leading you where you want to go. Imagine waking up in the morning and immediately checking your phone. Before you have spoken a word or taken a breath, your mind is already filled with opinions, headlines, messages, and comparisons. None of these were chosen intentionally. They simply arrived, and yet they shape your mood, your priorities, and your sense of self. This is how most days begin, not with thinking, but with absorbing. A critical thinking habit begins with reclaiming that space. It starts with awareness. Awareness that not every thought deserves your trust. Awareness that feeling certain does not mean being correct. Awareness that comfort often hides poor reasoning. When you begin to notice your thoughts instead of being carried by them, something changes. You gain distance. And in that distance, you gain choice. Think about the last decision you made that you later regretted. Maybe it was something small, like reacting defensively in a conversation, or something larger, like staying in a situation that was clearly unhealthy. If you look closely, the issue was not a lack of intelligence. It was a lack of pause. The decision happened too fast. The emotion led and the reasoning followed, if it followed at all. Critical thinking as a habit trains you to insert a pause into your daily life. Not a dramatic pause, just a brief moment where you ask yourself what is really happening here. What am I assuming? What evidence do I have? What emotion is influencing me right now? This pause does not slow your life down. It improves its accuracy. Many people resist this idea because they believe thinking critically will make life harder or heavier. They imagine endless analysis and doubt. But the opposite is true. Poor thinking creates complexity. Clear thinking simplifies. When you stop chasing assumptions and start examining them, many problems lose their power. They either become solvable or irrelevant. Consider how often people argue without understanding what they are defending. They repeat phrases they have heard before. They react to tone instead of meaning. They protect beliefs they have never examined because those beliefs feel like part of their identity. Critical thinking gently separates identity from opinion. It allows you to say, I may be wrong without feeling threatened. That alone is a powerful form of freedom. Turning critical thinking into a daily habit means practicing it in ordinary moments, not just important ones. It means noticing when you automatically agree with someone because they sound confident. It means questioning a familiar belief even if it feels uncomfortable. It means recognizing when a strong emotion is pushing you toward a conclusion before the evidence has arrived. Take something simple like a news headline. Most people read the headline and react emotionally. They feel anger or satisfaction or fear, and they move on. A critical thinker pauses. They ask what is missing. They ask who benefits from this framing. They ask whether one example is being presented as a pattern. This does not require expertise. It requires curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of critical thinking. Not the loud curiosity that demands attention, but the quiet curiosity that asks gentle questions. Why does this feel true? Where did this belief come from? What would someone with a different perspective say? When curiosity replaces certainty, learning becomes possible. Another key habit is separating facts from feelings. Feelings are real, but they are not evidence. You can feel certain and still be wrong. You can feel afraid and still be safe. You can feel confident and still be misinformed. Critical thinking does not dismiss emotions. It simply refuses to let them pretend to be facts. Imagine receiving criticism at work. The immediate feeling might be defensiveness or embarrassment. The mind may jump to conclusions like they do not respect me or this is unfair. A critical thinking habit creates space here. It allows you to ask what exactly was said. What evidence supports my interpretation? Is there useful information hidden inside this discomfort? Instead of reacting, you respond. Over time, this habit changes how you experience stress. Problems no longer feel like personal attacks. They become information. Feedback becomes data. Mistakes become signals instead of judgments. This shift alone can transform your emotional life. Critical thinking also involves recognizing bias, especially your own. The mind naturally looks for information that confirms what it already believes. This is comfortable. It feels efficient, but it is dangerous. It creates blind spots. A daily critical thinking habit involves gently challenging your own certainty. It means occasionally seeking out perspectives you disagree with, not to argue, but to understand. This does not mean abandoning your values. It means strengthening them. Beliefs that survive examination become more resilient. Beliefs that collapse under questioning were never solid to begin with. The goal is not to doubt everything. The goal is to understand why you believe what you believe. Another powerful practice is thinking in probabilities instead of absolutes. Life is rarely all or nothing. Yet the mind loves certainty. It wants clear answers and final conclusions. Critical thinking replaces this with flexibility. Instead of saying this will never work, you might say this has a low chance of success. Instead of saying they're always like this, you might say this behavior appears often in certain situations. This small shift reduces emotional intensity and increases accuracy. Daily critical thinking also changes how you consume information. You become more selective. You stop scrolling mindlessly and start choosing intentionally. You ask whether content is informing you or just stimulating you. You notice how repetition creates belief. You recognize when outrage is being used to capture your attention. As this habit grows, something interesting happens. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you know everything, but because you know how to think. You no longer need to rely completely on authority or consensus. You can listen, evaluate, and decide. This creates quiet confidence. Critical thinking also improves relationships. When you stop assuming intent, misunderstandings decrease. When you ask clarifying questions instead of making accusations, conversations soften. When you listen to understand rather than to win, trust grows. You become someone others feel safe thinking around. It is important to remember that this habit is built slowly. You will forget. You will react. You will catch yourself believing something simply because it feels right. This is not failure. This is practice. Every moment of awareness strengthens the habit. One simple daily ritual can anchor this practice. At some point in the day, reflect briefly. Ask yourself what assumption you made today. Ask what emotion influenced the decision. Ask what you learned. This does not need to be written down. It only needs attention. Over time, critical thinking stops feeling like effort. It becomes a way of seeing. You notice patterns more quickly. You recognize manipulation more easily. You respond instead of react. The world feels less chaotic because you are no longer taking every signal at face value. This habit also protects you from extremes. You become less likely to be pulled into panic or blind optimism. You learn to hold multiple possibilities at once. You can say, "I do not know yet," without discomfort. This openness is a strength, not a weakness. Turning critical thinking into a daily habit ultimately changes your relationship with your own mind. You stop seeing thoughts as commands and start seeing them as suggestions. Some are useful. Some are outdated. Some are simply noise. You learn to choose. And in choosing how you think, you choose how you live. Decisions become clearer. Regret becomes rarer. Growth becomes intentional. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you become grounded. Critical thinking is not about being smarter than others. It is about being honest with yourself. It is about noticing when convenience is replacing truth. It is about slowing down enough to see clearly in a fast world. When practiced daily, it becomes quiet strength, a steady compass, a way of navigating complexity without losing yourself. And once this habit is formed, it touches every area of life, from work to relationships to inner peace. You begin to realize that personal growth is not about adding more information. It is about improving the quality of your thinking. And that is a habit you can practice every single day. As the habit deepens, you may notice moments where your old patterns try to return. A familiar trigger appears, and the mind rushes toward its usual conclusion. This is normal. Habits do not disappear instantly. They loosen gradually. The difference now is that you notice the pull. You feel the momentum of the old reaction, and even if you still follow it, you are aware that you had a choice. Awareness always comes before change. There will be days when critical thinking feels effortless. Clarity comes quickly. Decisions feel aligned. On other days, emotions are louder. Fatigue dulls attention. In those moments, the habit still works quietly in the background. Even a small pause counts. Even a single question matters. Growth does not require perfection. It requires return. One of the most powerful shifts happens when you stop taking your thoughts personally. A thought appears, and instead of saying "this is me," you say "this is a thought." That subtle separation creates space. You're no longer inside the thought. You're observing it. From that position, choice becomes possible. Imagine a thought like "I am not good enough." For many people, this thought feels like truth. It shapes behavior. It limits risk. A critical thinking habit asks, where did this come from? What evidence supports it? What evidence contradicts it? Is this a conclusion or a feeling? Slowly, the thought loses its authority. It may still appear, but it no longer controls. This is not about replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It is about replacing unexamined thoughts with examined ones. Some thoughts survive the process. Others fade. The goal is accuracy, not optimism. As your thinking becomes clearer, you may also become more patient. You realize that quick judgments are rarely accurate. You become comfortable with incomplete information. You resist the pressure to have an immediate opinion. This patience protects your energy. It prevents unnecessary conflict. It allows understanding to emerge naturally. Critical thinking also sharpens intuition. This may seem surprising, but intuition improves when it is trained by reason. When you regularly test assumptions, your intuitive sense becomes more accurate. You learn the difference between fear and warning, between excitement and impulse. Intuition becomes informed rather than impulsive. Another quiet benefit is reduced mental noise. When you stop believing every thought, the mind becomes less crowded. Worries lose their urgency. Rumination slows. You realize how much of your mental activity was repetition rather than insight. Silence becomes easier to access. This habit also reshapes how you define success. Instead of chasing external approval, you measure success by alignment. Did my decision reflect my values? Did I act with clarity? Did I respond intentionally? These questions create internal stability. External outcomes matter less when your process is sound. There will be moments when critical thinking challenges comfortable illusions. You may realize that a long-held belief is inaccurate. You may see that a familiar path no longer fits. This can feel unsettling, but discomfort here is a sign of growth. Truth often arrives quietly and rearranges things slowly. It is important to be gentle with yourself during these moments. You are not losing certainty. You are gaining understanding. Let old ideas leave without resentment. They serve a purpose once. They no longer need to stay. As this habit integrates into daily life, it influences even small choices. What you eat, how you spend time, who you listen to. You begin to notice patterns between thought quality and life quality. Clear thinking leads to cleaner choices. Cleaner choices create calmer outcomes. Eventually, critical thinking becomes less about effort and more about identity. You become someone who thinks before reacting, someone who values understanding over assumption, someone who is comfortable saying, "I need more information." This identity shapes behavior naturally. The world will not slow down for you. Information will continue to arrive rapidly. Opinions will grow louder. Pressure will remain. The value of this habit is that you no longer need the world to change. You have changed how you meet it. You carry a quiet filter now, not cynical, not closed, just clear. You let ideas pass through examination before they settle. You choose what deserves belief. You choose what deserves action. And perhaps the most meaningful change is this. You begin to trust your relationship with uncertainty. You no longer need absolute answers to move forward. You know how to think your way through complexity. You know how to pause. You know how to ask. You know how to adjust. This is what it means to turn critical thinking into a daily habit. It is not dramatic. It is subtle. It shows up in moments no one else sees. In pauses. In questions. In quiet decisions. Over time, these moments accumulate. They shape character. They shape direction. They shape peace. And one day, without realizing what happened, you will notice that your life feels more intentional. Not because it is perfect, but because it is examined. Not because it is easy, but because it is honest. That is the power of thinking critically every day. It does not give you control over the world. It gives you clarity within it. As clarity becomes familiar, you may notice a deeper sense of responsibility emerging. Not the heavy kind that feels like pressure, but a quiet ownership of your inner life. You realize that while you cannot control every event, you can influence how you interpret and respond to them. This understanding changes how you experience challenges. Problems stop feeling like punishments and start feeling like puzzles. When something unexpected happens, the first response used to be emotional noise, worry, blame, frustration. Now there is a pause. The mind asks, what part of this situation is within my influence? What assumptions am I making right now? What story am I telling myself? This questioning does not remove difficulty, but removes unnecessary suffering. Critical thinking also teaches you to recognize patterns in your own behavior. You begin to see how certain situations trigger the same reactions again and again. The same doubts, the same defenses, the same escapes. Awareness brings choice. Choice brings change. For example, you might notice that when you feel uncertain, you seek distraction instead of clarity. Or when you feel criticized, you rush to justify yourself instead of listening. These patterns lose power when they are seen clearly. You no longer identify with them. You work with them. This habit also strengthens humility, not the kind that lowers self-worth, but the kind that accepts human limitation. You become comfortable saying, I might be wrong. You listen more carefully. You revise your views when new information appears. This flexibility keeps the mind young. Rigid thinking ages quickly. As humility grows, so does learning. You stop defending outdated ideas. You stop clinging to certainty. You remain open. Learning becomes continuous rather than conditional. Every interaction offers information. Every mistake offers insight. Critical thinking reshapes how you handle success as well. When things go well, you do not immediately attribute it to luck or ego. You examine what worked. You notice which decisions mattered. You separate effort from outcome. This reflection allows improvement without arrogance. The habit also changes how you experience time. When thinking is clearer, urgency decreases. You stop rushing toward conclusions. You give decisions the space they deserve. Time feels less like an enemy and more like a resource. One of the most powerful outcomes of this habit is emotional regulation. Emotions still arise, but they no longer overwhelm. You notice them early. You understand their message without obeying their command. Anger signals a boundary. Fear signals uncertainty. Sadness signals loss. Each emotion becomes information instead of identity. This understanding prevents emotional buildup. Instead of suppressing feelings or acting them out, you integrate them into thinking. This integration creates balance. You feel deeply without losing clarity. Critical thinking also protects your values in a world full of influence. Trends change. Opinions shift. Pressure increases. Without a thinking habit, values drift quietly. With it, values become anchored. You regularly ask whether your actions align with what matters most. This alignment creates inner stability. As days turn into months, the habit becomes invisible. You're no longer practicing it consciously. It simply happens. The pause appears naturally. The questions arise automatically. You feel when something does not make sense. This is mastery, not because you know everything, but because you know how to think. At this stage, you may notice that others respond differently to you. Conversations deepen. Conflicts soften. People feel heard. Not because you agree with everyone, but because you engage with understanding rather than reaction. Presence becomes your strength. You also become less reactive to uncertainty in the world. News no longer hijacks your mood. Opinions no longer provoke immediate response. You remain informed without becoming inflamed. This calm awareness preserves energy for what truly matters. The habit continues to refine itself. You notice subtler biases. You question deeper assumptions. Growth does not stop. It evolves. Thinking becomes a lifelong craft rather than a fixed skill. And through this process, something essential emerges. Self-trust. Not blind confidence, but earned trust. You trust your ability to navigate complexity. You trust your capacity to adjust. You trust your judgment because it is examined. This trust allows courage. You take thoughtful risks. You speak honestly. You choose paths aligned with meaning rather than approval. Fear does not disappear, but it no longer decides. Critical thinking as a daily habit does not make life predictable. It makes you prepared. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It equips you to meet it. You stop searching for perfect answers and start building sound reasoning. You stop chasing certainty and start cultivating clarity. You stop reacting to the world and start engaging with it. And in this engagement, personal growth becomes natural, not forced, not rushed, just consistent. This is the quiet transformation that happens when thinking becomes intentional. When the mind is no longer a place of automatic reaction, but a space of conscious choice. When each day becomes an opportunity to see more clearly, decide more wisely, and live more deliberately. And that is how critical thinking becomes not just a skill, but a way of life. As this way of life settles in, you may begin to notice something subtle but powerful. You feel less pulled by extremes, less shaken by praise, less wounded by criticism. Your sense of self becomes steadier because it is no longer built on every passing thought or opinion. It is built on understanding. You realize that many people around you are not struggling because of circumstances, but because of interpretation. The same event can create panic in one mind and curiosity in another. The difference is not intelligence. It is thinking habit. This realization brings compassion. Instead of frustration, you feel patience. Instead of judgment, you feel clarity. Critical thinking also changes how you relate to goals. You stop chasing outcomes blindly. You examine why you want what you want. Is it status or meaning? Is it fear or growth? This questioning saves years of effort that might otherwise be spent climbing the wrong ladder. Direction becomes more important than speed. There will be moments when slowing down feels uncomfortable. The world rewards quick answers and strong opinions. Pausing can feel like weakness, but over time, you see the truth. Most mistakes are made in haste. Most wisdom lives in patience. Your willingness to pause becomes a quiet advantage. You also begin to notice how language shapes thought. Words carry assumptions. Labels simplify complexity. Critical thinking makes you sensitive to this. You listen for what is implied, not just what is said. You choose your words more carefully, knowing they guide both your thinking and the thinking of others. This awareness improves inner dialogue as well. You stop speaking harshly to yourself. You replace vague self-criticism with specific observation. Instead of saying, "I always fail," you say, "This approach did not work." This shift removes shame and invites learning. As your inner dialogue softens, motivation becomes more sustainable. You're no longer driven by fear of failure or desire for approval. You're guided by understanding. Effort feels lighter when it is aligned with reason. Critical thinking also strengthens resilience. When plans change or efforts fail, you do not collapse into helplessness. You analyze. You adjust. You try again with new information. Setbacks become part of the process rather than proof of inadequacy. Over time, you may notice fewer dramatic emotional highs and lows. This does not mean life becomes dull. It becomes stable. Joy becomes quieter but deeper. Stress becomes manageable. Peace becomes accessible. This habit also refines your sense of meaning. You realize that meaning is not found in constant certainty, or constant success. It is found in honest engagement with reality, in choosing truth even when it is inconvenient, in acting with integrity even when it is unnoticed. Critical thinking does not separate you from life. It connects you to it more deeply. You see things as they are rather than as you wish or fear them to be. This realism is not pessimistic. It is freeing. As years pass, this habit continues to shape you in ways that are difficult to measure but easy to feel. Decisions carry less regret. Relationships carry more respect. Challenges carry less fear. You may look back and realize that the biggest change was not in what you achieved, but in how you experienced the journey. You were present. You were intentional. You were awake. This is the lasting gift of turning critical thinking into a daily habit. Not answers, but clarity. Not control, but understanding. Not perfection, but progress. And with each day that you choose to think rather than react, to question rather than assume, to pause rather than rush, you continue building a life guided by awareness instead of impulse. A life shaped not by noise, but by insight. As insight replaces impulse, you begin to experience a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being driven by every passing urge, fear, or opinion. This freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up in moments where you would once have reacted automatically, and now you choose deliberately. You might notice it when someone disagrees with you, and you feel no rush to defend. Or when an opportunity appears, and you take time to evaluate instead of jumping in. Or when a worry arises, and you examine it calmly rather than letting it spiral. These moments may seem small, but they are signs of deep change. Critical thinking as a habit also reshapes your relationship with mistakes. Errors no longer feel like personal failures. They become information. When something does not work, you ask what can be learned instead of who is to blame. This mindset encourages experimentation. Growth accelerates when fear of being wrong loses its grip. You begin to understand that certainty is often an illusion. Many people cling to rigid beliefs because uncertainty feels threatening. But uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the natural state of life. Critical thinking teaches you how to move forward without needing perfect knowledge. You make the best decision with the information you have, and you stay ready to adjust. This adaptability becomes one of your greatest strengths. When circumstances change, you change with them. You do not waste energy resisting reality. You work with it. This makes challenges feel lighter and opportunities clearer. As the habit continues, you may notice an increased sense of presence. Because you're no longer lost in automatic thought, you're more aware of what is happening now. Conversations feel richer. Simple moments feel fuller. You are less distracted by imagined futures or replayed pasts. This presence also deepens empathy. When you understand your own thinking patterns, you better understand others. You see how fear, bias, and habit influence behavior. This understanding reduces anger. It replaces judgment with curiosity. You listen not just to words, but to what lies beneath them. Critical thinking does not make you detached. It makes you grounded. You remain emotionally connected, but not emotionally controlled. You care deeply, but you see clearly. This balance is rare, and it is powerful. Over time, your sense of identity shifts. You no longer define yourself by opinions or roles alone. You define yourself by how you engage with reality, by your willingness to learn, by your commitment to clarity. This identity is flexible and strong at the same time. You also become more intentional with your attention. You recognize that attention is one of your most valuable resources. Where you place it shapes your experience of life. Critical thinking helps you protect it. You choose what deserves focus. You let go of what is not. This selectivity brings calm. You are less overwhelmed because you're no longer trying to process everything. You trust yourself to filter. You trust yourself to decide. As days continue, the habit keeps refining itself. You notice subtler emotional influences. You catch assumptions earlier. You pause more naturally. The mind becomes a tool rather than a battlefield. And perhaps most importantly, you develop patience with yourself. You understand that growth is gradual. That clarity comes in layers. That changing how you think is a lifelong process. This patience removes pressure. It allows progress to unfold naturally. You may not always feel wise. You may not always feel confident, but you will feel oriented. You will know how to find your way back to clarity when confusion arises. You will know how to slow down when things feel overwhelming. You will know how to ask better questions when answers are unclear. This is the quiet mastery that comes from daily critical thinking. Not dominance over others, but understanding of self. Not certainty about everything, but confidence in your ability to reason. And with that confidence comes peace. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of unnecessary turmoil. You stop fighting your own mind. You start working with it. Life remains complex. People remain unpredictable. The future remains uncertain. But you are no longer lost within these realities. You are engaged with them thoughtfully and intentionally. That is what it truly means to turn critical thinking into a daily habit. It is choosing awareness again and again. It is returning to clarity whenever distraction pulls you away. It is living from understanding rather than impulse. And with each return, the habit strengthens. Quietly, steadily, lastingly. As the habit settles even deeper, you may begin to feel something that once felt rare. Mental spaciousness. Your mind no longer feels crowded with constant judgments, predictions, and inner arguments. Thoughts still come, but they pass more easily. You are not clinging to each one. You are not fighting them either. You are observing, choosing, and letting go. This spaciousness changes how you rest. Even when you're busy, there's a sense of calm underneath. Even when decisions are difficult, there's a sense of steadiness. You're no longer in a hurry to escape discomfort because you understand it better. You know that discomfort often carries information. Critical thinking teaches you to sit with questions without rushing toward answers. This is a skill few people develop. Most want immediate certainty, but clarity often needs time. When you allow space, insights arrive naturally. Solutions appear without force. You stop pushing a mind and start listening to it. This listening also extends outward. You hear people more fully. You notice inconsistencies without needing to point them out. You sense when something does not align, and you wait. Timing becomes intuitive. Silence becomes useful. You may also notice that your tolerance for meaningless noise decreases. Not because you feel superior, but because your attention has become valuable to you. You choose depth over volume, substance over stimulation. This choice protects your energy and sharpens your focus. Critical thinking as a habit reshapes ambition as well. You still want to grow. You still want to improve. But the urgency softens. You are no longer chasing worth. You are building alignment. Goals become expressions of values rather than attempts to fill emptiness. When setbacks occur, and they will, you do not collapse into self-blame. You review. You adjust. You move forward. This resilience is not loud. It does not look dramatic. It feels steady. It feels grounded. Over time, you may realize that your inner world has become a place of cooperation rather than conflict. Reason and emotion work together. Curiosity guides fear. Patience balances urgency. You're no longer divided against yourself. This inner cooperation affects your outer life. Decisions feel cleaner. Boundaries feel clearer. You say no without guilt and yes without hesitation. You recognize what matters and you protect it. You also become more comfortable with growth that others cannot see. Quiet improvement, subtle shifts, internal clarity. You no longer need constant validation because your standards are internal. You know when you are thinking clearly. You know when you are not. Critical thinking also teaches you to recognize when rest is needed. Fatigue affects judgment. Stress narrows perspective. You listen to these signals instead of pushing through blindly. Caring for your mind becomes part of thinking well. As years pass, this habit becomes part of how you experience life itself. You do not separate thinking from living. Each moment is an opportunity to notice, to question, to choose. This does not feel heavy. It feels natural. You may encounter people who seem lost in reaction, trapped in certainty, driven by unexamined beliefs. You recognize your former self in them. This recognition brings empathy, not distance. You remember how easy it is to sleepwalk through life when thinking is automatic. And you remain humble because you know the habit requires renewal. Awareness can fade. Old patterns can return. But now you know the way back. You know how to pause. You know how to ask. You know how to listen. This knowledge is not fragile. It stays with you. Even when life becomes chaotic, even when emotions surge, the habit is there, waiting to be used. Like a compass, it does not remove storms, but it keeps you oriented. In the end, turning critical thinking into a daily habit is not about mastering thought. It is about respecting it, treating your mind as something to care for, to train gently, to use wisely. You stop letting the loudest thought win. You stop letting fear decide by default. You stop mistaking familiarity for truth. And in doing so, you reclaim something essential. Agency, the ability to choose how you see, how you decide, how you act. This choice, repeated quietly day after day, shapes a life that feels intentional rather than accidental. A life guided by understanding rather than impulse. A life where growth is not forced but inevitable. And that is the lasting transformation that comes when critical thinking is no longer an occasional effort, but a daily habit. Congratulations on making it to the end of this journey. Most people never finish what they start, but by staying until the final minute, you've already proven that you are serious about your personal growth. Remember, critical thinking is not a destination. It's a daily practice. The mental models we discussed today are the tools, but you're the architect. If you found value in today's session, please hit the like button and subscribe to AudioBook Global. Your support helps us continue bringing life-changing wisdom to people all around the world. For those of you who are ready to take this mastery to the next level, you can find the link to purchase the full, high-quality version of Critical Thinking Mastery in the description and the pinned comment below. Having the full text allows you to revisit these lessons and truly cement them into your daily habit. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and as always, listen, learn, level up. We'll see you in the next one.